From the moment Mark sat across from me, I felt my stomach churn. "I need you to defend me, Amanda," he said, a casual smile on his face, as if he hadn't just confessed to something illegal. I looked at him incredulous. My years of providing free legal advice to my family seemed to have built an unspoken expectation that I would always be there for them. No questions asked. But this time it was different. I had a right to refuse, and I felt the weight of my professional integrity pressing down on me. Mark had gotten himself into trouble again. He was in over his head, and I could tell. Part of me wanted to help him out like I always did, but another part of me screamed to stop. Why was I always the one sacrificing my time and my reputation? With the upcoming family gathering just days away, I knew I had to confront this issue before it spiraled further out of control. I glanced at his confident demeanor, not a care in the world, and I felt a familiar wave of resentment wash over me. Here was my younger brother, the golden child, thinking he could just waltz into my life and ask for my help without any repercussions. I had always been the responsible one, the one who picked up the pieces when he messed up. It was exhausting, and I was done letting his choices dictate my life. As I sat there, I could feel the tension in the air. I could already hear the family's whispers, the pressure building. They would expect me to jump in and save him as if that was my role. I had to put an end to this. I needed to stand my ground and remind Mark that I wasn't his personal lawyer. This time, I would prioritize my own needs over the family's expectations. Growing up, I was always the one making sacrifices for my family. Mark, the golden child, basked in the glow of our parents' favoritism. It was as if my role was to support him, while my own contributions and aspirations were brushed aside without a second thought. I remember countless moments where my needs were set aside to cater to his whims. If I had a school event or a big deadline at work, it didn't matter. Mark's sports games, his friends' needs, and his latest scheme were always prioritized. I had spent years providing him with free legal advice, covering for him when he found himself in trouble, legal trouble no less. I should have known better, but I always felt that I had to be there for him, to save him from the messes he created. He once asked me to help him out of a situation that could have seriously damaged his reputation. I did it, of course. I didn't want to see him suffer, but that was the moment I began to resent what I had become. His personal legal advisor, expected to drop everything to help him. As I sat across from Mark, I could feel the weight of our mother's disapproving gaze from the other room. She had always instilled the idea that family comes first, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness and career. It was clear. The family rule was simple. I was to support Mark no matter the cost to my own life. If I slipped up even once, I could expect a lecture about loyalty and family values. The emotional toll this dynamic took on me was mounting. I was starting to realize that my family's expectations were suffocating me. They saw me as a resource, a safety net for Mark. They didn't care about my career or how his actions affected my reputation. All they cared about was that I played my part. The pressure was palpable, and each time I was asked to help, it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. I could see it clearly in Mark's eyes. He had grown accustomed to my support. There was no gratitude, no acknowledgement of my sacrifices, just an expectation that I would always be there for him no matter what. I was angry, but more than that, I was tired. Looking back, I realized this pattern had been established long ago, and was reinforced by our mother. I had been the one to pick up the pieces, the one who had to keep the family together. I was the go-to person for help, but in reality I was just being used. I had been conditioned to believe that my worth was tied to my ability to support Mark. Why should I have to sacrifice my own dreams for someone who wouldn't think twice about dragging me into his mess? As I reflected on this, I felt a surge of determination. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the responsible sister, but that was changing. I had to remind Mark and myself that I was a lawyer with my own career, not just his safety net. I felt a growing resolve to confront this toxic dynamic head-on. With the family gathering just days away, I knew I had to take a stand. I had to break this cycle of expectation and obligation. It was time to prioritize my own needs and refuse to be manipulated any longer. I was tired of being the one who always gave in, the one who always said yes. This time would be different. I would set boundaries. I had to. I thought about how I would approach the conversation with Mark. I had to be firm to make him understand that my support was not guaranteed. I needed him to realize that I was no longer willing to play the role of the dutiful sister who sacrificed everything for him. This was my moment to reclaim my power and assert my boundaries, and I was ready to do it. The moment of truth came when I overheard a conversation between Mark and our mother while I was in the kitchen, pretending to clean up after dinner. They thought I couldn't hear them, but I caught every word, and it felt like a punch to the gut. "She'll help me. She's always been there for us," Mark said, his voice dripping with casual confidence, as if he was discussing the weather rather than his latest legal trouble. I froze, my hands gripping the dish towel tightly as the realization washed over me. I was nothing more than a tool to him, a convenient resource he could use whenever he found himself in a jam. I felt my heart drop at his words. After all these years of bending over backward for him, I was reduced to a mere obligation. It was a stark reminder of how my love and support for my family were being exploited. I was no longer a sister. I was just a means to an end. The weight of that realization hit me hard, and I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me like boiling water ready to overflow. They didn't see me as a professional, someone who had worked hard to build a career and maintain my integrity. No, to them I was simply Amanda, the lawyer sister who was expected to jump in and save the day whenever things went south for Mark. This was the cycle I had allowed to continue for far too long, and now it was time to break it. I could hear our mother's voice in the background, soothing and supportive, as if she were nurturing a child. "Of course she will. Your family, Mark. She has to help you. You can't just leave her out of this." The words dripped with expectation, as if my loyalty was a given. It was humiliating. I had spent years helping Mark out of trouble, providing him with advice that I should have never given for free, all while sacrificing my own reputation and well-being. I had given him the benefit of the doubt time and time again, but this was the last straw. I could no longer ignore the truth. I had to take a stand. I felt a surge of determination as I realized I couldn't let this continue. I was tired of being the one to clean up after him, tired of being the family's safety net. I deserved better, and it was time to put my foot down. No more advice. No more support. I had to refuse him this time. As I stood in the kitchen, my heart racing and my mind racing even faster, I thought about how I could confront him. How could I make him understand that I wasn't going to be his lifeline anymore? I could feel the pressure building inside me, a mix of fear and resolve. I was scared of the fallout of what my family would say, but I knew I had to do it. Later that evening, I summoned the courage to call Mark into the living room. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. My heart pounded in my chest as I faced him. He looked at me with that same casual smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Mark, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He raised an eyebrow, curiosity peeking as he leaned against the wall. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "I won't defend you. This is wrong and I can't be a part of it anymore." His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. "What do you mean you won't help me? You always help me." "Not this time," I replied firmly, even as my hands trembled slightly. "If you go through with this, I'll report you. This isn't just a simple mistake, Mark. You're crossing a line and I can't be involved. I have my career to think about." He laughed it off, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He didn't take me seriously, and that only fueled my determination. I could feel the tension rise in the room, thickening the air around us, but I stood my ground. I had finally set a boundary. In that moment I realized something powerful. I was reclaiming my voice. I was no longer the silent sister, the one who played along with the family's expectations. I was standing up for myself, and it felt liberating. As I watched his reaction, I knew that I was ready to face the fallout, whatever it may be. I took a step back, feeling a rush of adrenaline. I had said it. I had stood up to Mark, and I wasn't going back. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, despite the fear of what was to come. I was no longer going to be his safety net, and for the first time in years I felt a flicker of hope for my own future. I called Mark to the living room, the tension in the air almost palpable. My heart raced as I prepared to deliver the words that would change everything. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, but now that it was here, my hands felt clammy, and I could hear the thudding of my heart echoing in my ears. "Mark, I need to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He sauntered in, casual as ever, leaning against the wall with that same confident smile, as if he had no idea what was about to hit him. "What's up?" he replied, his tone lighthearted, completely unaware of the storm brewing within me. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to meet his gaze. I knew I had to be firm. "I won't defend you. This is wrong and I can't be a part of it anymore." His laughter echoed off the walls, a sound that grated against my resolve. "What do you mean you won't help me? You always help me." His tone shifted from playful to incredulous, and I could see the disbelief creeping into his eyes. "Not this time. This isn't just a simple mistake, Mark. You're crossing a line and I can't be involved. I have my career to think about," I explained, my voice unwavering despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from casual to defensive. "Come on, Amanda. You're my sister. You can't just abandon me now. I need you." I felt the familiar urge to cave, to give in to the pressure of family loyalty, but I stood my ground. "This isn't about being a good sister anymore. This is about my integrity and my career. If you go through with this, I'll report you. I mean it." The shock on his face was almost satisfying. For once, I was the one calling the shots, and I could feel the weight of expectation begin to lift. But instead of remorse, he laughed it off as if I was joking. "You're joking, right? You can't be serious. You've always had my back," he said, disbelief etched across his features. I could feel the tension rise in the room, thickening the air around us. My heart pounded in my chest, but I refused to back down. This was my moment. I had finally set a boundary, and I wasn't about to let him trample all over it. "I'm serious, Mark. I'm done being your safety net. You need to face the consequences of your actions, and I won't be a part of your mess this time," I stated firmly, my voice steady. He opened his mouth to respond, but I could see the gears turning in his head. The disbelief began to shift into anger. "You're ruining everything. You're just a selfish lawyer." He spat, his words cutting deep. I stood there unflinching, even as his accusations hit me like a slap across the face. It was clear that he didn't understand. He didn't care about my sacrifices or the toll this had taken on me. All he cared about was himself. But I wasn't about to let his words shake me. I took a deep breath, letting the anger roll off me like water off a duck's back. I was finally being seen for who I truly was, not as their punching bag. The onlookers could see their true colors, and that validation gave me strength. I watched as his expression shifted from anger to disbelief, and I felt a rush of empowerment. I had finally stood up for myself, and it felt exhilarating. I had broken the cycle of expectation, and I could finally breathe again. Mark's face twisted with frustration, and I could feel the tension in the room escalate. But I had said it. I had stood up to him, and I wasn't going back. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders, despite the fear of what was to come. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a mix of liberation and fear. I had taken a step towards reclaiming my life, and no matter what happened next, I knew I had made the right choice. No more would I be dragged down by my family's toxic dynamics. This was my life, and I was ready to live it on my own terms. Days passed, and the pressure began to mount like a heavy weight on my chest. My mother cornered me one evening as I was preparing dinner, her voice dripping with guilt and concern. "You can't just abandon your brother now. He needs you," she said, her tone sharp and accusatory. It was as if she was trying to twist the knife deeper into my resolve, forcing me to reconsider my decision. I stood there, chopping vegetables, my hands moving mechanically as my mind raced. Each slice felt like a reminder of the emotional turmoil I was in. I could almost hear the unspoken family rule echoing in my head. Loyalty above all else, even if it meant sacrificing my own integrity. It was a burden I had carried for far too long, and now it felt like it was suffocating me. My mother continued her relentless assault. "You're being selfish, Amanda. Think about how this will affect Mark. He's your brother, and he's in trouble. You can't just walk away from your family like this." Her manipulation was palpable, as if she were trying to make me feel like a villain for wanting to protect my own career and reputation. Every word she spoke was designed to pull at my heartstrings, to make me doubt my decision. I could see the disappointment in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt the familiar pang of guilt wash over me. But then I remembered the humiliation I had felt when I overheard Mark's conversation with her. I couldn't let them push me back into that corner. I had to stay strong. Mom, this isn't just about Mark. It's about me and my career too. I snapped, my voice rising. I was done with the guilt trips. It was time to put my foot down, even if it meant facing the wrath of my family. She gasped, clearly taken aback by my sudden burst of defiance. How can you say that? He's your family. You're supposed to help him. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, and for a brief moment I wavered. But then I remembered how her tears had always been used against me, how they'd been a weapon to ensure my compliance. I had to break free from this cycle. Mom, I can't keep being the one to save him. I have my own life, my own responsibilities. I'm tired of being the family's safety net. I felt a rush of emotions, a mix of anger and determination that I had been holding back for far too long. But my mother wasn't finished. She pressed on, her voice low and intense. You think you can just walk away from this? You think the family will support you if you turn your back on Mark? You'll be the one they blame. The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud, and I could feel the weight of her words trying to drag me back into the darkness of family loyalty. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I can't live my life for them anymore. I have to do what's right for me. If they want to blame me, so be it. I can't be part of this toxic dynamic anymore. Her expression shifted from concern to anger. You're making a huge mistake, Amanda. You don't know what you're doing. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I felt a mix of relief and dread. I knew this was just the beginning. My mother wouldn't let this go easily, and I could already feel the tension building within our family. But for once I had stood up for myself. I had set a boundary, and I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation push me back into submission. That evening, as I lay in bed, I replayed the confrontation in my mind. I felt a sense of empowerment, but I also knew the challenges ahead would be significant. Mark would not take my refusal lightly, and my mother would continue to pressure me. It was going to be a battle, one I had to fight not just for myself but for the life I wanted to live. One free from the chains of family obligation and expectation. I could already envision the family gathering looming on the horizon, a ticking time bomb where tensions would surely explode. I had to prepare myself for whatever Mark would throw at me, and I had to remain firm in my decision. No more bending to their will. I was done being the dutiful daughter and sister. It was time to reclaim my life. At the family gathering, I could feel the tension in the air like static electricity. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, and yet I felt like I was walking into a minefield. Mark had been waiting for this moment, and I knew it. As I made my way through the crowd, I could see him standing there, a smug grin plastered on his face, surrounded by his friends. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my resolve. I had to stand firm. As he introduced me to his friends, I could feel the weight of their gazes on me. "This is my sister, the lawyer," he said, his tone dripping with pride, but I could sense the underlying mockery. It was as if he was setting the stage for another performance, expecting me to play my usual role as the family savior. I forced a smile, my heart pounding in my chest. They turned their attention to me, and I could see the expectation in their eyes. They were waiting for me to validate his claims, to jump in and save him as I had done countless times before. When Mark casually mentioned needing my help, I could almost hear the collective breath of the family, as if they were all waiting for me to rescue him. My stomach twisted in knots. This was the moment of truth, the test of my limits. I could feel the pressure building, and I knew that I had to make a choice. I could either give in like I had always done, or I could stand my ground. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside me. I had to remind myself of all the reasons I had decided to break free from this toxic cycle. "Mark, I won't help you," I finally said, my voice steady but my heart raced. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the shock on their faces, the disbelief that I wouldn't play my part. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through me, a mix of liberation and terror. I had finally said it. Mark's grin faltered, and I could see the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "What do you mean you won't help me? You always help me," he exclaimed, his voice rising as he tried to grasp the situation. "Not this time, Mark. I'm done being your safety net. You need to face the consequences of your actions, I replied, my tone firm. I could feel the eyes of our family on us, and I knew they were expecting me to back down, to cave under the pressure. But not today. I stood my ground, feeling a mix of fear and empowerment. You're ruining everything, he shouted, his voice dripping with venom. You're just a selfish lawyer. The words stung, but I forced myself to remain composed. I could see the anger in his eyes, the realization that I was no longer going to be the obedient sister he could manipulate. The crowd began to murmur, whispers swirling around us, and I could feel the weight of their judgment. My heart raced, but I stood there unflinching. I was finally being seen for who I truly was, not as their punching bag. I could feel the tide beginning to shift, and it gave me strength. As I turned my back on him, I felt a rush of freedom. I had broken the cycle of expectation, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming my life. Mark was left to deal with the fallout of his actions, and I was no longer responsible for cleaning up his mess. The whispers and stunned expressions from our family were like a dam breaking. They had to deal with the chaos they had created without my support. I walked away, my heart still pounding, but I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I was no longer bound by their expectations or their manipulations. The world felt brighter, and I was ready to embrace the freedom that came with standing up for myself. As I moved through the gathering, I could hear the conversations shifting, the whispers about Mark's incompetence. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I had finally taken a stand, and yet I was terrified of what would come next. The pressure was still there, but I was determined to hold my ground. I had stepped out of the shadows and I wasn't going back. I was finally ready to live my life on my own terms. I stood my ground. No, Mark. I won't help you. The silence that followed felt deafening. I could see the shock on their faces, the disbelief that I wouldn't play my part. I felt liberated yet terrified. I turned my back and walked away, leaving Mark to face the consequences of his own actions. The whispers and stunned expressions were like a dam breaking. They had to deal with the chaos they had created without my support. As I walked away, my heart raced. I felt like I had just jumped off a cliff. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, and I was acutely aware of the eyes on me, family members and acquaintances alike, all watching the spectacle unfold. I had always been the one to support Mark, the one who cleaned up his messes and made excuses for him. But not today. Today I was taking a stand, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I could hear Mark's voice behind me, laced with anger. You're ruining everything. You don't know what you're doing. But I didn't turn back. I kept walking, my mind racing with a mix of emotions. The weight of family loyalty that had suffocated me for years was beginning to lift, and I felt a lightness in my step that I hadn't felt in ages. At that moment I realized that my decision was not just about Mark. It was about me reclaiming my life, my career, and my identity. I was no longer going to be defined by my family's expectations or the role they had assigned to me. I was breaking free, and I could feel the thrill of that freedom coursing through me. As I made my way through the crowd, I could hear snippets of conversation around me. Family members were whispering, some in disbelief and others in judgment. I caught a few phrases. Can you believe she said no? And what's wrong with her? But their opinions didn't matter anymore. I had made my choice and I was ready to stand by it. The more distance I put between myself and that moment, the clearer my thoughts became. I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing. I was finally letting go of the burden of trying to be the perfect daughter or sister. I had fought hard for my career, and I was not going to let anyone drag me down because of their failures. As I stepped outside for some fresh air, I took a deep breath, savoring the cool breeze against my skin. Felt like a new beginning. I looked up at the sky, taking a moment to appreciate the freedom I had just claimed. I wasn't sure what the fallout would be from my decision, but I knew I was ready to face it. I had finally stood up for myself, and that alone was a victory. The serenity of the moment was abruptly shattered when Mark stormed out after me, his face flushed with anger. You think you can just walk away? You're my sister. You're supposed to help me. His voice was loud, and I could feel the stares of others turning toward us again. I turned to face him, my heart still pounding but my resolve solid. I'm not your safety net anymore, Mark. You need to face the consequences of your actions, and I won't be dragged into your mess this time. My voice was steady, and I was surprised at how calm I sounded despite the chaos inside. He scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're just going to abandon me? You're a lawyer, Amanda. How can you just leave me hanging like this?" I took a step back, feeling the anger simmering just below the surface. This wasn't about abandoning him. It was about standing up for myself. "You've taken advantage of my support for too long, Mark. I'm done enabling you. You need to grow up and take responsibility for your actions." The crowd around us had shifted from curious bystanders to a captivated audience, and I could feel their eyes on us. It was surreal, and I felt a mix of fear and empowerment. I had never imagined I would confront Mark like this, but here I was finally asserting myself. Mark's jaw clenched, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He was struggling to comprehend my refusal. "You're making a mistake, Amanda. You're going to regret this." His voice was filled with frustration, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. "I'm not going to regret taking control of my life, Mark. I deserve better than this toxic dynamic, and I'm not going to sacrifice my career or my integrity for you anymore." The anger in his eyes shifted to disbelief, and I could see that my words were striking a chord. For so long I had allowed him to manipulate me into feeling guilty, but now I was finally breaking that cycle. I was no longer letting guilt dictate my actions. As I turned away from him once again, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I had broken the pattern, and I was ready to face the consequences. The whispers behind us grew louder, and I could feel the weight of their judgment, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was prioritizing myself over my family's expectations. I took one last look at Mark, who was still standing there, stunned and furious. I could see the realization dawning on him that I wasn't going to be his crutch anymore. I felt a rush of satisfaction, knowing that I had finally taken a stand. As I walked away, I could hear the hushed conversations around me, and I knew this was just the beginning. I had no idea how my family would react or what the future held, but I felt a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. I was ready to embrace it no matter the cost. I had stepped into a new chapter of my life, one where I was finally in control. No more being the dutiful daughter. No more being the enabler. It was time to live for me. Instead of remorse, Mark exploded with rage. "You're ruining everything. You're just a selfish lawyer." His words cut through the air like a knife, and I could feel the sting of his accusations hitting me square in the chest. The anger radiating from him was palpable, and for a fleeting moment, I felt that familiar mix of guilt and shame creeping back in. It was like a reflex, one I had practiced for years, feeling responsible for his failures and the chaos around us. But not this time. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the reality of the moment. I could see the faces of our family members, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. It was a surreal scene, as if I had stepped out of one world and into another, where the rules had suddenly changed. They were all watching this unfold, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. But I refused to let their opinions sway me now. I had made a choice. Mark's voice rose higher, laced with desperation. "You always help me. You've always been there for me. How can you just turn your back on me when I need you the most?" His eyes were wide with fury, and I could see that he genuinely could not comprehend my refusal. It was as if he believed that my loyalty was an unbreakable bond, one that I had to fulfill no matter the circumstances. I felt the anger simmering in me starting to bubble to the surface. It was infuriating to stand there and listen to him twist the narrative, to hear him play the victim when he was the one who had put us all in this situation. My heart raced as I responded, "I'm not turning my back on you, Mark. I'm finally standing up for myself. You've taken advantage of my support for too long, and I'm done enabling you." The silence that followed was deafening, and I could hear the faint murmurs of our relatives, the whisper spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Can you believe she said no?" one cousin muttered. Another added, "Isn't she supposed to help him?" Their incredulity only fueled my determination. I was breaking free from the role I had played for so long, and it felt exhilarating. Mark's expression morphed from anger to confusion, and in that moment, I could see the realization dawning on him. He was losing control and his facade was crumbling. "You're making a huge mistake, Amanda. You don't know what you're doing." His voice was laced with a mix of anger and fear, and I could see that he was grappling with the implications of my refusal to support him. I stood my ground, refusing to back down any further. No, Mark. You're the one who's made a mistake by assuming I would always be there to catch you. I have my own life, my own responsibilities, and I refuse to be dragged into your messes anymore. The words tumbled out, fueled by years of pent-up frustration and resentment. It was liberating to finally voice what had been buried deep inside me for so long. The crowd around us shifted in their seats, some leaning in closer to hear every word, while others exchanged glances filled with disbelief. I could feel their eyes on me, their judgments hanging heavy in the air. But rather than faltering under their scrutiny, I felt a surge of strength. I was finally being seen for who I truly was. Not just the dutiful sister but a woman who had the right to make her own choices. Mark's anger reached a boiling point and he lashed out, his face flushed with rage. You're ruining everything. You think you're better than everyone else because you have a fancy job? You're just a selfish lawyer. The venom in his words stung, but I refused to let it penetrate my resolve. I could feel the tension in the room, the collective breath being held as everyone awaited my response. It's not about being better than anyone else, Mark. It's about being true to myself. I've spent too long living in your shadow, cleaning up your messes, and it's time for me to prioritize my own life and my own career. My voice rang out, clear and unwavering. In that moment I felt empowered, and I could see the shock on the faces of my family members as they processed my words. I was finally breaking the cycle of expectation, and it was exhilarating. As I turned my back on him, I felt a rush of freedom wash over me. I had broken the chains of obligation, and I was ready to embrace the consequences of my actions. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I had finally stood up for myself, and I knew that the fallout would be significant. But for the first time I felt that I could handle it. Mark stood there, stunned, his mouth opening and closing as if he were searching for the right words but failing to find them. I could see the anger boiling just beneath the surface, but I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was no longer responsible for his failures, and that realization was like a weight lifting from my shoulders. As I made my way through the crowd, I could hear the whispers of disbelief behind me. What's wrong with her? One relative murmured while another questioned, can she really just walk away like that? But their opinions no longer mattered to me. I had finally taken a stand, and I was ready to embrace the consequences. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, my heart still racing. I felt the cool breeze against my skin, and I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the sensation. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one where I was finally in control. No more being the dutiful daughter. No more being the enabler. It was time to live for me. As I stood outside, I took a moment to reflect on what had just happened. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My mother would likely be furious, and Mark would surely retaliate. But I was ready to face whatever came my way. I had finally found my voice and I was determined to use it. This was my life and I was reclaiming it. As the family gathering continued, I found myself stepping back, observing the fallout from a distance. The initial shock of my refusal to help Mark had sent ripples through our family, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment watching it unfold. I had never been one to shy away from confrontation, but I had always managed to keep the peace, even at the expense of my own integrity. But now, as I stood off to the side, I realized that the chaos was no longer my burden to carry. Mark was fumbling, struggling to maintain his composure in front of our relatives. The facade he had built over the years was beginning to crack, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Without my legal guidance, he was floundering, and it was a sight to behold. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I watched him attempt to explain away his situation, his words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. I don't know why she's acting like this, he blurted out, his voice rising above the murmurs. She's just being selfish. She's supposed to support me. I could hear the whispers around me, the family members exchanging glances filled with disbelief. They had always viewed me as the reliable one, the go-to sister who would bail Mark out of trouble. But now, as I stood apart, I saw their expressions shift from confusion to curiosity. For the first time, they were questioning Mark's narrative instead of blindly accepting it. As he continued to speak, the truth of his incompetence became glaringly obvious. I watched as he tried to spin his tale, embellishing details to make himself look better. But the more he talked, the more it became clear that he was out of his depth. The family members who had once rallied around him were now exchanging concerned glances, and I could see their doubts beginning to surface. How could he not know that? Someone whispered, their incredulity palpable. I felt a rush of relief wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when the family would see Mark for who he truly was. A man who had relied on others to clean up his messes and had never taken responsibility for his actions. I stood back, allowing the scene to play out, feeling a strange mixture of pride and liberation. I had broken the chains of obligation, and while I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I also knew that I was finally free from the weight of family loyalty that had suffocated me for years. I was no longer responsible for Mark's failures, and that realization filled me with a sense of power. As I watched the gathering unfold, I could see the shift in dynamics. Questions were being asked, and for the first time Mark was being held accountable for his actions. I could see the disbelief on my mother's face as she tried to defend him, but her words fell flat in the face of the growing skepticism among our relatives. It was a turning point, and I felt as though I was witnessing a transformation, one that I had longed for but had never dared to imagine. Amanda would have helped if she wanted to, I heard one cousin say, and I felt a swell of affirmation. They were starting to see the truth, starting to realize that my refusal to support Mark wasn't an act of betrayal but an act of self-preservation. I had finally taken control of my own narrative, and in doing so I had empowered myself to reclaim my identity. While Mark continued to flounder, I made my way to a quieter corner of the gathering. I needed a moment to myself, to process the whirlwind of emotions that had surged through me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lifting just a little more. The distance I had created between myself and my family felt surreal yet liberating. I watched from afar as Mark's attempts to manipulate the situation crumbled around him. The more he tried to spin his story, the more the truth emerged. It was almost cathartic to witness, knowing that I had played a role in this unraveling. I was no longer the enabler, I was the one who had broken the cycle. As I reflected on the moment, I felt a newfound sense of clarity. I had finally stood up for myself, and the consequences of my actions were playing out before me. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Mark but for our entire family. I knew there would be fallout from my refusal to support him, but I also knew that I was ready to face it head-on. I had chosen my path and there was no turning back. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, knowing that I had reclaimed my life from the toxic dynamics that had held me captive for so long. The gathering continued, but I felt detached from it all. I had stepped into a new chapter of my life, one where I was finally in control of my own destiny. I was no longer defined by my family's expectations or the role they had assigned to me. I was Amanda, a competent and resilient lawyer, and I was ready to embrace my independence. Days turned into weeks after the family gathering, and I felt a profound shift in my life. I had finally broken free from the toxic ties that had bound me to my family for so long. The silence that once felt oppressive now felt like a comforting blanket, wrapping me in peace. I focused intently on my career, pouring myself into my work and finding fulfillment in the victories I earned on my own merits. I was thriving and it felt amazing. My phone rang less often and I didn't mind. Each time a call from my mother or Mark showed up on my screen, I hesitated before hitting ignore. It was a small act of rebellion, a reminder that I was in control of my choices. I had made it clear that I wouldn't be available to clean up their messes anymore. The emotional toll of their demands had been heavy, but now I felt lighter, free to make decisions based on my own needs. I started taking trips by myself, exploring places I had always wanted to visit. I treated myself to nice dinners and indulged in hobbies that had been put on hold for years. The silence of my apartment was a welcome change. It was a sanctuary where I could recharge. I felt empowered to create my own happiness, without the weight of family expectations. As the months passed, my mother continued to reach out, her tone filled with disappointment and guilt. But I had learned to prioritize my integrity over their manipulation. Each ignored call was a testament to my newfound strength. I had chosen my path, and I was ready to embrace the independence that came with it. I was finally at peace, unburdened by the past, and excited